Welcome to the G Lab. I'm Mr. G. Principles of natural selection. We're going to take a look at what is it that natural selection needs in order to work. The first thing basically is you need some differences to work off of. Individuals of every species have genetic variation. In other words, they're different. They have some diversity. And you need that in order for natural selection to work. So where do they get that variation? Well, they get it naturally through sexual reproduction. So when two parents combine their genes into a new offspring, it turns into something different, a blending oftentimes of many of the traits between the two parents. And so sexual reproduction allows for that diversity, that genetic variation. And if you look at any trait, so for instance, let's imagine this is the height of human beings. You might find that there is sort of what's called the bell curve, a classic shape here, that says, yeah, most people, if this is the number of human beings on the y-axis here, most people seem to fall in about the same range. And with humans, it's probably in the 5'7" range for males and females combined. So there's obviously some people that are taller that are up here in the 6-foot range, or maybe even 6'6", or up here there's even a few people that might be, 7 foot or 7'6". Whoa, not too many though. And again, same with the shorter end of the range. There might be a few people who are down here in the 4 foot or 4'6" range, and moving their way up. You're going to find that most people are going to be in the middle here. But it's this variation that then allows there to be winners and losers. It's the variation that allows there to be certain traits that are more advantageous, that are more helpful than other ones, and other ones that are less helpful. The other place you can get genetic variation is from random mutations in DNA. So when DNA copies itself, whether that's in asexual reproduction or even in sexual reproduction, when DNA copies itself, it doesn't always copy perfectly. And it's all of these C's, T's, G's, and A's that make up the genetic code, and that essentially tell your body, or the body of a tree or a fungus or a bacteria, how to make itself. And so if some of these letters get switched around, so for instance, if this GCT instead gets copied as TCG, so it gets flipped, you may end up with a mutation that causes something different to happen. Now, most of the time, we don't even know about these because, well, the organism has something missing and it doesn't actually even form correctly. Other times it forms something that is harmful, and other times it forms something that's helpful. So some mutations can be helpful, and if they're helpful, then they will then become part of the next generation of organisms, the next generation in that species. Part of their DNA will be that helpful mutation. So here's an example of a helpful mutation. If you're a bacteria, you are living in colonies oftentimes with other bacteria of your type. So here are these colonies. The yellow little dots here are all colonies of bacteria. And what these white dots are, large white dots are medicine. It's an antibiotic. An antibiotic is supposed to kill off bacteria. Well, it just so happens that this strain of bacteria is resistant to these two antibiotics. In other words, they have some sort of protection or immunity to this drug that's supposed to kill them. So that's a great thing. Not for humans, but it's a great thing if you're a bacteria. You have resistance to this antibiotic, and so that originally comes from a mutation that happens. It makes it a stronger, more resistant bacteria. It will then pass on that trait to its offspring because it reproduces asexually. So very helpful mutation there if you're a bacteria. Not very helpful if you're a human, of course. Here's another example of a helpful mutation. This here is a human blood cell on the left, and this is another human blood cell on the right, but this one isn't formed correctly. This is what's called a sickle cell, and this is a disease called sickle cell anemia. And here's how you get it. Basically, it's a pretty simple Punnett square. Two big ends, you have normal blood. A big N and a little n, normal blood. And little n, you have sickle cell disease. So why would this be a helpful mutation? Well, it's not if you get the little n. But if you happen to have one little n along with a big N, you actually have protection, immunity from malaria. So anytime you have a little n, it gives you protection from malaria. Not a good thing if you end up with the disease itself, but this mutation actually has, over time, led to a large number of people who are actually protected from malaria because of their genotype. So they're actually better off than if you had two big N's like many people do. These people have normal blood, but they have no protection from malaria. Now, two parents, of course, who have big N, little n, if they have children, they may find that a quarter of their children end up with sickle cell disease. Half their children will have normal blood, and a quarter of their children will have normal blood with no protection from malaria. And so it kind of depends on where you end up in that story to determine whether you're going to have an advantage or not in life. And that's the idea, is that with genetic variation, there's some winners and there's some losers, and it's the winners that are the ones that then pass their genes on. Most random mutations, though, are harmful. In fact, here's an example of a harmful random mutation right there. Yep, nothing there. Because oftentimes harmful mutations don't even allow a fetus to form, or a seed to form if you're a plant. So oftentimes we don't even know that mutations have happened because the offspring is not even born. But this would obviously be a pretty harmful mutation. It would be some sort of a birthmark like this. It would make you more susceptible to predators. Any kind of mutation that basically reduces your chances of survival, that's going to be a harmful one. And that tends to be the case. With mutations, 99% of them are not going to be helpful. They're going to be harmful, or at best, they may just be sort of there, like a normal birthmark. It's just there. It's not really harmful or helpful. It's just there. Some could be harmful or helpful. Kind of depends on the environment that you're in. This large reptile here could probably, this is an albino, so it doesn't have the regular pigment, the coloring of a normal alligator, but this could be a helpful adaptation if it lives in a white sand environment, or perhaps if it lived in the snow, which not too many alligators do. Some mutations just ain't going to happen. An organism will not just give birth to an offspring that has fully formed wings, for instance. Maybe some skin flaps that might help it glide a little bit more, but you're not going to end up with fully formed traits like wings just like that. It doesn't just happen overnight. Those things take many, many generations to develop. So, you can wish all you want for the coolest mutations to occur, but they're just not going to happen. And it doesn't really matter how hard you try. It would be great if you're a beaver, if you had a chainsaw tail, but it doesn't really work that way. There's got to be a mutation that actually can logically happen. And if it helps, great. If not, too bad. All right. So once you have some genetic variation, there needs to be a second part to the process. There needs to be some competition. There needs to be some winners and losers, in a sense. And we're talking about life in the wild in a harsh, harsh world. I like this quote by Richard Dawkins, who says, "Nature is neither cruel nor kind. It's simply indifferent." Indifferent simply means that it doesn't really care. It just is. So nature's not trying to punish. It's not trying to shine its sunshiny face on you and be kind to you. It just is. And today is a beautiful sunny day outside. As I look outside the window, nature's not trying to be kind to me or anyone else around here. It just is. In fact, if you're a farmer and you're trying to grow crops, you may actually want some rain to fall. But so today is a cruel day to you if you're a farmer, but it's a kind day to me as someone who wants to go out and go for a bike ride. So it kind of depends on your position. Essentially, what the deal is that nature just is. It's just indifferent, and it's sometimes pretty harsh though to compete out there in the world. You can be the most well-adapted creature out there, and some random event like a meteor falling or a disco ball falling on you could take you out. And accidents happen. Things happen that seemingly are pretty random. All right. With that in mind, where do we see competition happening? Well, here's an intense scene of competition. These trees are in serious competition. It doesn't look like much, but they're growing intensely toward up. They're trying to get tall, basically. They're competing with each other for light. And if they don't grow fast enough, they're not going to get much light, which means they're not going to grow much more, which means they're eventually going to die. And so competition for light, if you're a tree, or for water, if you're a tree, you're competing for limited resources. Animals do the same thing. They're competing for food, they're competing for nesting space, and so forth. There is just a limited amount of resources out there, and there's a intense competition to get those resources, sometimes with other species, sometimes with members of your own species. Another thing that organisms compete for is for food or to not be food, so basically against predators or prey. So if you are a prey species, you better be fast, you better be alert, you better be camouflaged, you better be able to move quick back and forth and try and evade a predator. If you're a predator, you probably better be a lot of those same things: camouflaged, eyes in the front of your face to help you track your prey. You better be fast, you better have some sharp claws and teeth to be able to take down prey, and so forth. So it's a rough struggle out there. You can't just go to the grocery store out in the wild. You got to hunt it down or be hunted. Another thing that offers a level of competition in the world is competition to stay healthy against things like parasites and disease. So things like ticks and mites and fleas and diseases that would affect you, or if you're a tree, a fungus can be a disease, or insect attack, or humans, things like the plague or infections. When you have a cut in the wild, if you have no access to medical care, a simple cut can lead to an infected wound that eventually can take your life or severely reduce your chances of survival. So parasites and disease are major factors in the wild, and not all species have therapeutic shampoo to help take care of these kinds of things. It's a tough world out there. Another thing that you really kind of have to compete against is environmental change. Here's a forest that burned down completely, and lodgepole pine actually has a tremendous adaptation that allows them to deal with a completely burned forest. In fact, they like that, and here's why. They have what are called serotomous cones. So serotomous cones are basically cones that are held together with resin, basically like a waxy pitch, or the sap holds these cones together, and they don't open up until there's a hot fire. The hot fire melts that wax, opens them up, and the seeds then fall. And when they land, they're growing in an environment now where there's very little competition, and there's also no shade from the trees above them. So they're able to grow very quickly and do quite well. A lodgepole pine seed that falls in a thick forest will not grow very well because it's too shady for it. So they actually like to burn. Lodgepole pine, part of their reproductive strategy is to just burn the entire forest down, including themselves, and then their offspring seed in and go from there. Other environmental changes can be even a larger scale, like the scale of the Earth. Here's an example would be climate change. So climate is changing and threatening species like the pika. Pika live in rocky areas up in the mountains, usually up above tree line, where there's just in the alpine areas. And as the environment changes and warms, forests can now grow at higher elevations and higher elevations, and it's slowly making the pika having to move. It's going to have to move farther and farther up the mountain until there's no more mountain left. And if the mountain's completely covered with forest, there's no more habitat for the pika. Could the pika adapt and start to compete in the forest? Perhaps, but there are already other species that are much better adapted to living in a forest environment, and they're going to come right along with that forest. So the chances of the pika actually competing against them or adapting quick enough, pretty slim. The climate is changing at an increasingly rapid rate compared to how fast animals can adapt. Probably not going to happen. So that poor little guy's days are probably numbered. Finally, there's a serious competition out in the world for mates. And so these bison here are competing, showing off essentially, and showing how fit they are to breed. So they'll fight it out. They'll demonstrate how strong and tough they are. Oftentimes, species, their strategy is to try and show how awesome they are and how big and strong they are without actually having to fight. Because fighting itself, to fight off a rival male, for instance, it could be good for you because you can show how awesome you are, but you can also get injured in the process. Even if you win the fight, you can still have a broken limb or a wound that won't heal. And so it's generally better for an organism to simply strut its stuff around and kind of try and posture a bit and say, hey, get away from me, I'm awesome, don't mess. Another strategy here you can use, of course, is the strategy that this third bison back here might be using is, oh, these two males are fighting over women. Why don't I walk over and romance that woman on my own? And I don't know if bison really do this, but the sneaky male sometimes can be the most successful. The cuttlefish actually does this. I hear that it actually, while two males are fighting, another cuttlefish will disguise itself as a female, sneak into a cave where the female is, reveal itself as, oh, it's a male, mate with the female, and then sneak back out of the cave. All the while, those two males are trying to fight it out for that female. Well, she was already taken. So there's a lot of strategies out there that might work in terms of competition for mates. So once you have genetic variation and you have some competition, some winners and losers, what you end up with is this. The organisms who are most fit for their environment survive and reproduce, and therefore they pass on their more fit genes. And the word fit here isn't necessarily meaning, in good shape in the sense of going to the gym and getting fit or running a mile or doing push-ups. We're talking about fit for the environment. So you don't look at a fish like this and think, oh, look at that six-pack abs. That's impressive. These fish are incredibly well adapted to their environment. These salmon actually travel for thousands of miles to the ocean, out into the ocean. They make a living out there in the ocean for several years. They come back. They swim all the way back to the original stream that they were hatched from. I can't imagine that any more than 1% of these guys make it from an egg all the way to the ocean and back to breed, to spawn. And so which 1% makes it? Well, definitely the most fit salmon are the ones. And the competition is incredibly intense. And so the ones that are the most fit are the ones that survive and then are able to reproduce. And here you have it. It doesn't just happen with the larger animals, but also some of the smaller ones as well. Look at that cute little heart. So to sum up, what do you need? You need three things. You need genetic variation, so some diversity and some differences among our organisms, some raw material to work with, that's some winners, so you can have winners and losers. And you can't really have winners and losers unless you have some sort of competition out there in nature for survival. And then finally, you end up with reproduction. Basically, once things survive, they can then reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation. It's a tough world out there, folks. I hope you can make it. Thanks for coming to the G Lab. We'll see you next time.